Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm excited to have Chris Rodriguez on the show, a senior public policy advisor for the National Disability Institute. Chris and his colleagues were at the forefront of the creation of the ABLE accounts, which were game-changing for Americans living with a disability. ABLE accounts allow folks to receive money from loved ones without losing access to vital health care and other services that are income and asset-based. Chris is the leading expert on ABLE accounts and was able to share a lot of information about how they work, who should use them, and how you can leverage them to help your clients. Additionally, we were able to dig into a few other things like the importance of people-first language, the misconceptions of stigma surrounding people with disabilities, and how you as an advisor can get involved. For our listeners that have a client or clients with family members living with a disability, this episode is for you. If you'd like more time to spend with your clients, First Ascent Asset Management can help. First Ascent builds and manages investment portfolios for independent financial advisors and their clients for a flat fee of $500 per account. This industry-first approach to pricing makes professional investment management affordable for everyone without sacrificing quality. First Ascent's 7-member investment committee includes 5 CFAs, a PhD, and a CFP who collectively bring decades of experience, objectivity, and fresh perspectives. First Ascent offers a variety of portfolios designed to produce solid long-term performance while keeping internal expenses and trading costs low. First Ascent's high-touch service team stands with you as a resource to provide guidance and to make account opening and servicing the accounts easy and hassle-free. They also offer a streamlined technology platform to facilitate proposal generation and paperless account opening. Visit their website at firstascentam.com or give them a call at 720-465-7888. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/92. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. You will find a discount code to attend XYPN 17 in August, a can't-miss event with over 500 advisors expected this year. Early bird pricing ends at the end of March, so get your ticket today. Without further ado, here's our episode with Chris. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for being on.
Absolutely, Alan. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
So I'm really excited because one of our members and frequent listeners had introduced us, and he said that you were just a total rock star and expert in sort of this topic of planning and I guess what's out there for advisors that are looking to work with clients that may have a child or may themselves have a special need. So I'm really excited to sort of get into some of the various special needs plannings tools and that sort of things that exist and many of us don't know. So, but I guess before we sort of jump into that, I always love to hear about folks' career paths. So I guess how did you sort of get into this path? What was your, I guess, college major and sort of how did that lead into the career that you're in today?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we should start a little before college. I'm actually the sibling of an individual, my older brother. His name is TJ, who lives in Texas outside of Houston where I grew up, but he has pretty significant intellectual and developmental disabilities. So growing up with my brother and my parents, obviously having a unique position and vantage point in terms of seeing some of the struggles and challenges that are associated with having a family member with disabilities, and then kind of combining that with just a natural interest and inquiry into politics and policy, I kind of found myself concentrating on disability-related law, which has been really interesting. And then in college, I attended the University of California at Berkeley and studied political science and was able to actually do a minor in disability studies out there. It's a pretty unique program that they have, although there are more now. And then went to go work for a group called the ARC of Texas, which is a state office of a national organization called the ARC of the United States that provides all kinds of supports for people with disabilities, specifically mostly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities like Down syndrome, autism, things like that. And then really kind of wanted to get more focused in the policy realm and the law realm. So I went back to school and got my master's in social and economic policy with a concentration in disability policy and disability law. So I feel very privileged to have really been able to pair up two passions of mine, one, protecting the rights of folks with disabilities, and two, just a natural, again, inclination for policy and politics, which has really led me here to Washington, D.C., working for the National Disability Institute. National Disability Institute's been around for about 10 years now. It was founded by my boss, Michael Morris. And what really differentiates NDI, and one of the reasons I really enjoy working here, is that it really separates itself from other disability-related national advocacy organizations, of which there's probably over 100 here in Washington. And it does that by having a very, very specific focus, and that's on helping individuals with all disabilities and their families have opportunities for greater economic mobility and financial self-sufficiency. So that really allows us to point our resources in a very directed position, whereas other organizations who obviously do incredible work on behalf of people with disabilities as well, but might concentrate on much broader policy perspective like criminal justice and healthcare and financial planning and, civil rights, whereas we can concentrate our efforts specifically on increasing economic mobility. So I'd like to think that we've cultivated some fairly perhaps unique relationships or unconventional relationships with respect to being a disability advocacy organization as a result of our mission. To name a few, we work very, very closely with the Department of Labor. They have a group there, an agency called ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, that we work very closely with. We also have very close ties with doing work with the Treasury and IRS to help folks do filing taxes for low to moderate income workers with disabilities. So we got about 50% of our funders are from the public sector, and then another 50% are the private sector. We get a significant amount of funding from folks like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citi, and a couple others to help increase the banking of underrepresented populations, of which obviously people with disabilities make up a strong percentage of that. So I'm very happy to do what I do. I consider myself very blessed to be able to contribute.
That's so awesome. It's such a different world than I admittedly live in, just because we're very much not on the policy side and doing sort of the implementation of financial planning. But I don't know that a lot of folks realize what all is happening behind the scenes in order to get the policy and laws and such written. It's not like politicians just sit down and write all of their own bills and come up with all their own ideas and throw them out there and see what happens. So what does disability advocacy really mean? I mean, what is the core of that mission? I guess, and again, I'm just sort of not familiar with this world. So I guess what is the purpose of that?
It really starts with the grassroots. I work here in Washington, D.C. with a lot of my other colleagues that work here, but really what we're doing is we try and represent the best interest of people with disabilities and their families all over the country. And many of us have contacts, or a lot of us actually, to be honest with you, aren't unlike myself, in which have family members and who have grown up seeing the challenges that can often be associated with having a family member with a disability. So we see it firsthand. Other folks and other organizations have local state chapters that they turn to really try and figure out what are these challenges, what do they look like, and how could we possibly start to address them with, more progressive policies and laws. In the last few years, we've seen an incredible amount of energy being geared towards helping people with disabilities gain employment, real integrated competitive employment, and start to actually make money, which is extremely important, obviously, in terms of increasing one's health, independence, and quality of life. With that has come some other things that NDI has taken a specific interest in, and that has to do with a lot with financial literacy. These are things that are often taken for granted in terms of education with a typically abled individual, but that haven't been provided for people with disabilities over the years because there was an assumption dating back over the decades that people with disabilities, number one, could not work, and number two, would always be reliant on federal benefits and programs. So there was no reason to teach them basic financial literacy, education, and capability tools. And we're proving, not only from perspective as an agency and advocacy, but really coming from the people with disabilities themselves, that we're finding that people with disabilities not only can work, but they really have a strong passion to contribute to the American workforce. And I really believe that it's an underutilized group of folks that, if we really took advantage of a lot of the contributions, would help. You'd see benefits across, the spectrum in terms of employment and and different contributions made. So those are some of the things that we've been concentrating on in terms, at least in the last probably 10 years, that have been really big in the disability sphere in terms of policy. A lot of it's related, again, around employment opportunities, of which, obviously feed into the NDI mission of creating economic mobility and financial self-sufficiency.
Yeah, talk about having multiple barriers to overcome. One being just the assumption that someone with a disability can't work, and so it's not even really presented as an option. And then two, even if they are then able to gain employment, not actually teaching them the skill set on how, what to do at that point. So I imagine it's a multi-pronged effort from both of those pieces, as well as, educating employers and these folks, advocates or whatnot, just that what all is out there. Cause I just feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's a lot of not so good folks also in this world of trying to help. If you start Googling around for financial literacy programs or really anything like this, you start to see the websites pop up that look unscrupulous, to say the least. So, and I guess it's hard to even know, as a financial advisor, which I definitely want to dig into, it's sort of where to even start. But, you mentioned having a clear focus, which is our listeners will find that amusing simply because one of our big focuses on this show is having a niche market, having a very clearly defined target, because it makes it much easier to make decisions around what programs should you actually support, what policies should you be focused on, because you can spread yourself too thin if you're trying to do a little bit of everything, because it's all important. It all needs our focus, but you can't do everything at once. So is there a lot of coordination among the various groups? I mean, you said there's over 100 just in DC, or are they all is it pretty inefficient where they're all sort of just doing their own thing and being competitive, or is there a lot of collaboration of sort of different niche markets sort of working together?
Right. I think it's kind of a combination of the two. Certainly, obviously, people with disabilities often have similar types of needs with respect to broad policy, but to a certain respect, depending on the person's specific type of disability, they might have different needs. And one organization might represent all people with disabilities like NDI, and another one might just represent people with autism and their specific needs, or people with Down syndrome and their specific needs. But I think there's certainly a concerted effort in the disability community to coalesce around different policy adjustments or amendments or more progressive thoughts that everybody can benefit from, as opposed to trying to silo each other. I think when you really start to kind of just have your own best interests at heart, it's very difficult for policymakers really to get a grasp on the direction they should take with broad policies related to people with disabilities. And we try and start off, with basic principles. I mean, things that any other person in the United States would appreciate. Another, going back to employment. Employment is not only an issue for people with disabilities, but it's a broad issue. I mean, we can look at, pick whatever election you would like. There's at least a significant amount of time that concentrates on the economy, which is based in large part to a certain extent on the employment rates and the employability of people and education and things like that. And just as important as those are to typically abled people, they're just as important to people with disabilities. And we should be providing people with disabilities the tools and support to pursue those different aspirations, not unlike we give the tools to anybody else.
So one of the things that I noticed, and I only know this because I know someone that's a special education teacher, and that is the language that you use is very specific. And this is something that it's a shame that we're not taught at any point in terms of how to actually refer to a person with a disability. So you've used a couple of terms where you say person with a disability, not disabled person, or autistic person. You said person with autism. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of, I guess, and I don't like the term PC because that implies that it's a bad thing, but what is the proper terminology at this point in the way that, if we're going to refer to this population that's appropriate, not offensive?
Right. Yeah, Alan, I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a great question. First and foremost, I think you hit it. There's a philosophy out there called person first language, whereas you would say a person with a disability rather than a disabled person. But really, when you ask a person with a disability, what would you like to be called? It's usually Jeff, because that's my name. But there are certain terminologies that have been used over the years in a derogatory manner to a point in which we've wanted to, or we've made efforts to, eradicate them. Obviously a lot of people have heard the R word, the retarded. And now we've definitely phased that out. And in terms of a technical term, it's typically intellectual and developmental disabilities. So things like that. But I think it's a very good point. I mean, people obviously want to, and typically when I hear people misuse certain terms or the manner in which they talk, it's not because they're trying to be rude or have any malice. It's just basically, like you said, people are unaware of what happens to be the most appropriate way to address people, whether that's people with disabilities or from the LGBT community or what have you. So it's great that we can all coalesce around certain different types of education. And it's great that we have opportunities like this one to educate folks that are interested in learning.
Yeah, and it may seem like a minor thing unless you're a person in that population. And then it kind of feels like a big thing because, when you hear the same phrase used over and over and you try to educate people, but, it's not really your job if you're in that population to educate other people in the way that they should interact with you. You would just hope people would sort of figure it out. But it can be very hurtful and it can stigmatize things that don't need to be stigmatized. And so as a financial advisor, if a client says, they have a grandchild with autism, if you start talking about their autistic grandchild, that it could very well turn that person off because it just shows a bit of ignorance and may be offensive, but two, it just kind of shows that you don't know that population. And so you're probably not the right advisor for them, right? Like, especially if they're coming to you with that need and they're going to go, that's a real easy way to be like, okay, yep, you're not the one. Like, we're going to move on. So for financial advisors out there, actually, let me take a step back. In a few years ago, I guess, and you can probably tell me some of the history of it, everyone seems to be very excited that the ABLE accounts law was passed or the law was passed to create the ABLE accounts. So I guess, first off, are you excited about it? Did it really bring some, awesome opportunities and sort of fill a need that needed to be met? And two, can you tell us a little bit about them and I guess what financial advisors may need to know about them in terms of using them with their clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. The ABLE Act was signed into law in December 19th of 2014. Its formal name is the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. And I tell you what, it took nearly a decade to get this piece of legislation through Congress. But by the time that it made its way to the president's desk, it had overwhelming bipartisan support, both on the Senate side and the House side, meaning that Republicans and Democrats alike agreed that this was a significant step in the right direction in terms of giving some financial peace of mind to people with disabilities and their families. And what it basically does is, in its most basic sense, it creates a new option for some people with disabilities and their families to save for their future while protecting their eligibility for publicly funded benefits. And that's the real important part of it. So many people with disabilities often have very special healthcare needs. And these healthcare needs often can only be addressed through a program called Medicaid, which makes it incredibly, incredibly important to people with disabilities. This is the type of coverage that you really can't find through an employer-based insurance program or on the open exchange market. So a person who has significant disabilities and has special healthcare needs as a result of that, if they don't have Medicaid, then they can really be in a lot of trouble with respect to their particular needs. Now, the kicker of this entire thing is, despite the fact that they literally can't go anywhere else for this kind of coverage, is that in order to be qualified for support such as Medicaid that people with disabilities often absolutely depend on for their independence and quality of life, there's an asset limit, which basically states in a lot of circumstances that the individual can never have more than $2,000 worth of assets at any given time in order to remain eligible for these Medicaid benefits and Social Security benefits. So oftentimes people, we put out a lot of information out there related to poverty in people with disabilities and just the staggering instances and statistics behind the correlation between people with disabilities and poverty. And people ask, well, why is that? Well, a big chunk of it is because people with disabilities rely on these benefits through Medicaid and Social Security. And in order to make sure that those are secure, they have to put themselves in a circumstance of poverty, or else they'll get kicked off of those programs and can lose supports and services that literally help them stay alive, which is pretty incredible. So ABLE comes along and does is it allows people with disabilities, and not all people with disabilities, because there are certain types of criteria that are related to the eligibility of being able to open up one of these accounts. But it allows them this tax advantage savings account where they can put money in, can have multiple contributors. There's no rule saying that you can have too many contributors. Anybody can contribute into a person's ABLE account. And those funds that grow in that account, it's basically an investment account, are not taken into consideration when determining eligibility for these federally funded means-tested benefits, which is pretty incredible. So in many circumstances, this is the first time that a person with a disability or their family has ever been able to save for their future, giving them, at least an opportunity towards a new level of economic independence and really a level of financial peace of mind, which cannot be understated how important that is and how revolutionizing it is to have those capabilities all of a sudden.
So is an ABLE account something sort of like an IRA where you can take, you basically put money in and when you turn, 59 and a half, you can start taking money out? Or is it more like a, sort of a brokerage account or a bank account where you're putting money in, you can invest it if you want, but it can be used at any time in order to pay for various expenses?
So, when the law was being created, it's always beneficial to help to kind of pair it with another law that folks are familiar with or policymakers are familiar with. It just creates a better environment in which to explain it. So the law that the ABLE Act was kind of mirrored after was the 529 college savings accounts. And to a certain extent, they're very, very similar. So like I said, anybody can contribute into these accounts, and they are used, or the funds in the account are restricted for the use of disability-related expenses, of which whenever those might come up, an individual can pull the funds from the account and pay for those to help offset what can be very costly expenses related to their disabilities as they grow. So, but there are certain differences that you would certainly want to keep in mind. For example, all contributors combined, of which again anybody can contribute to a person's ABLE account, but all those contributions combined are not allowed to exceed $14,000 in any given tax year. So that's an important characteristic to remember. Additionally, unlike a 529 college savings account, an individual can only be the beneficiary of a single ABLE account. So you're not allowed to have more than one ABLE account at any given time. So that's, again, something that folks should consider. They're very similar, and especially for your audience out there who might be working with families with special needs children or family members, they might be more familiar with special needs trusts, which offer very similar benefits with respect to protecting the eligibility of the beneficiary in terms of their public benefits, but have subtle differences. Well, maybe not so subtle. Like, obviously you can put as much money as you want into those particular trusts, whereas ABLE accounts, you can only put in $14,000 a year. On the other hand, kind of what the argument was to create this new law was people recognized that the benefits of having a special needs trust were incredible and very extremely useful. However, they were finding that they were really only being used by folks from kind of a higher socioeconomic background. And they looked into it and they realized, well, it's basically because the cost of opening these special needs trusts is often several thousands of dollars. It requires hiring a lawyer and going through a lot of legal things. Whereas an ABLE account is extremely simple to set up. You do it yourself online. It shouldn't take more than maybe 15, 20 minutes to set these programs up. And they've been created in such a manner that keeps their costs extremely low. As an example, many of the programs, of which there's now, I think today, the 17th program opened up today, actually, out of the state of Vermont. On average, I would say that the annual administrative fee for these programs is usually no more than at the top $60. So what is that? $5 a month. And many of them have no cost to open. Oftentimes there is a fee associated with whatever investment vehicle the beneficiary or their family member decides to go with. But they're significantly less costly in terms of setting up and maintaining than their special needs trust counterparts.
So it really does come down to cost savings, because that's what I was sort of trying to chew on. Is like, what's the difference here? What do you get with an ABLE account that you don't get with a special needs trust? And the answer is you don't have to hire a lawyer. Like you said, $60 a year. I can't get my attorney to open an email for less than $60. So much less, ongoing administration. The $14,000 does seem like a major limiter. And so, especially in the instance of an inheritance. So, if a client were to pass away and want to leave their child, $100,000 into their ABLE account, is there a way to do that? Or do they have to have a special needs trust at that point?
Right. That's a good point. That is a very significant difference between the two. And there's no way to put in currently in any given tax year more than $14,000 into an ABLE account. Now, that's not to say that, you could put in $14,000 on December 31st and put in another $14,000 on January 1st. So technically within a 48-hour period, you put in $28,000 because it is divided into tax years. But yeah, that is a significant difference between the two with respect to how much money and how quickly you can put those into the accounts. Another thing that I would encourage people to pay attention to is kind of twofold. One, obviously the special needs trust is overseen by trustees, and the funds in the account don't actually belong to the beneficiary. The beneficiary isn't the account owner. ABLE is very different. ABLE, was created in a new era of progressiveness with respect to the abilities of people with disabilities. And as a result, we wanted to make sure very distinctly in the law, it was stated that the beneficiary is the account owner, which means that folks with disabilities who have an ABLE account can exercise far greater financial independence over the funds in the account than, say, they could with a special needs trust. So that's something to take into consideration. On the flip side, if you have a client that's really looking for more of a wealth transfer tool, a special needs trust would probably, in my opinion, might be the better way to go, because an ABLE account does have a provision called a Medicaid payback provision. And this is very important to understand. This is probably one of the more criticized aspects about the law. What it basically says is that when the beneficiary of the ABLE account, so the person with a disability who's also the account owner, passes away, if they've been receiving supports and services through their state Medicaid program, which many of these individuals, as a result of the severity of their disabilities, will be, and we discussed that a little earlier on, the state basically maintains how much or what the cost of those benefits provided to that individual have been over their lifetime. And what the ABLE Act states is that the state in which that has been providing those benefits can file a claim when the beneficiary passes away to be reimbursed for those supports and services paid by the Medicaid agency, starting at the point in which the ABLE account was opened. So that's going to make it very difficult, because we understand that folks with severe disabilities, many of the folks that will be setting up ABLE accounts, do have significant needs with respect to supports and services provided through Medicaid. Those are very costly. So it's not unreasonable to think that if a person has had an ABLE account for any substantial period of time, that claim is going to be fairly significant and could in fact wipe out the ABLE account. In contrast, a special needs trust, while it does not give the beneficiary nearly as much financial autonomy, or allows, and is far more costly in terms of setting up and often maintaining, you can set it up in a manner in which when the beneficiary passes away, those funds could be transferred, to a living sibling or somewhere else. So that's another thing to take into consideration when advising clients in terms of their different options for saving for their son or daughter with a disability or themselves, and comparing an ABLE account to a special needs trust.
Maybe this is not correct, but it sounds to me like having to pay back Medicaid is sort of like if you were getting unemployment insurance and then you get a job and they say, okay, you got a job, now pay us back. It's very interesting that that's one of the few programs, or one of the only programs I'm aware of, that it's like, okay, give us the money back at some point, if you're able. Whereas we don't typically do that with, government-based programs like that. It's such an odd requirement. I understand they're trying, there are a few bad apples out there that generally we created all the rules for that were, doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing with trying to transfer money around. But that does seem a little restrictive, but it's good to know that, good for advisors to know that that's out there.
Right. Yeah. And, there's nothing in the law, and this is something that I often like to point out when I'm giving presentations on ABLE and special needs trusts and things like that. There's nothing that says you can't have both. Oftentimes I think you'll find, that the benefits that can be realized by having both are often greater than having either one individually. You can use money in a special needs trust to fund an ABLE account, and the individual can exercise greater financial autonomy over the ABLE account without giving that individual, $400,000 all at once or something like that, or help somebody ease into understanding how to manage funds by slowly putting money into an ABLE account. So there's different things like that. I think, both an ABLE account and a special needs trust are two tools, right, that can be utilized. And really it needs to be, in order to figure out which tool is best for any given person or any given family, it really has to be seen through the scope of that family or that person with a disability, their comforts, their knowledge, and their needs.
So you make a great point that we're talking about two tools, and I'm assuming there are many more tools in the tool belt for, advisors to be able to leverage with their clients. So are there any other popular tools out there that you think that advisors need to be sure they're staying on top of?
I think when it comes to folks with disabilities, I think the majority of the tools with respect to putting away money for the future of a person with disabilities are really going to come down to an ABLE account, a special needs trust, or what's called a pooled trust, which is very similar to a special needs trust. It's just it pools the funds of many different beneficiaries and often is overseen by a nonprofit disability-related organization or something like that. There's other programs that offer individuals opportunities to pursue employment, to pursue the benefits related to Medicaid without jeopardizing eligibility. One of those is called a Medicaid buy-in program, which will allow an individual to kind of go over those asset limits, but actually purchase kind of like a premium basically into the benefits that's being provided through Medicaid. In different states, it's up to the state whether or not they want to provide this particular program. I think over half the states actually do have it, and you can make up to a certain percentage of the federal poverty level and be able to buy into the program so that you can pursue employment and save some money while not losing your eligibility for Medicaid and sometimes Social Security. So those are different programs, and I think, understanding them can be a very difficult thing, and really understanding how they can all be used together to really maximize the benefits to create a comprehensive tool to really support the person with a disability is the difficult part. And again, I think there's no one size fits all for many things in life, specifically for the needs of people with disabilities, which is why a lot of these have to be seen again through the lens of the person with a disability and their specific needs and the period in time in which they're going to have those needs.
If I'm an advisor and I, have a client that has a child with special needs, or I start to see that this is becoming a trend in my business, where do I go to learn? In the CFP program, they don't mention, outside of, probably touching on special needs trust, there's not a lot more than that. So where do I go to actually get myself informed? Are there conferences or online courses or certifications that are available to just sort of educate ourselves on, the various rules and regulations and sort of what's out there?
Right. That's a great question. I think, special needs trusts have been around for quite a while, and there's a lot of different resources with respect to those that you can get online and find. Special Needs Alliance is a great place to go to just get some basic information and kind of dig in there. What probably, in terms of the need for education, I think a lot of it is much greater in the ABLE space just because this law is relatively new and there's a lot of questions about it. And because of that, and because, here at National Disability Institute, we've recognized the benefits and the potential benefits of this really being a game changer for people with disabilities and their families with respect to economic mobility. Our founder, Michael Morris, no more than 2 weeks after the bill was signed into law, created what's called the ABLE National Resource Center. And this is a collaborative founded and managed by NDI, but it really is a coalition of over 25 of the country's largest and most prominent disability-related national nonprofits. And the aim of the ABLE National Resource Center is really to provide unbiased information and technical assistance to all ABLE-related stakeholders, not the least of which, obviously, is people with disabilities and their families. Just this past March, we launched the website. It's www.ablenrc.org, ablenrc.org. It's just been astounding to see the traffic on the website. Clearly, there's a need for these accounts. I think since March, we've seen over 600,000 page views, and we've tried to put as much information up there as we can. There's short videos that introduce ABLE accounts to ABLE-related stakeholders. They're about 10 minutes long, gives you kind of the ABLE basics, if you will. We do ABLE-related webinars about every other month, and we archive them there on the website. We try and reach out. Again, this goes back to kind of what is disability advocacy, but we try and reach out to the grassroots and to family members who have maybe heard about ABLE but aren't exactly sure what it is, and perhaps right now are a little hesitant to be involved. And we ask them, what are some of your hesitations? What would you like to know more about specific to ABLE? We take that information and then we create webinars and videos around those specific questions. A great example of this was just a couple months ago. We started looking at kind of the behavior of folks that were looking into creating an account. And we realized that despite the fact that they made it through the process all the way through eligibility, so the person was eligible and they understood everything, they got to the page when they were prompted to pick an investment option. And we found that a lot of these programs that were offering these accounts, they were dropping off of that page. And we started to realize, wow, you know what? We've been describing these as, quote unquote, tax advantage savings accounts for people with disabilities and their families. We've never informed anybody that these in reality are really investment accounts. And we started to realize that these folks are starting to feel a little hesitant when they're kind of, to a certain extent, broadsided by the fact that they have to choose an investment option. So with that, we reached out to some friends in the financial planning world and set up a webinar. And we did an hour and a half on educating folks that, yes, ABLE accounts are a savings account, but they're really an investment account, and then educating folks on the basics about what to look for, what to think about when choosing investment options under ABLE. So that's just an example of how we try and stay very, very connected with people with disabilities and their families in order to kind of curtail or develop what's on the website. Additionally, like I said, it's been a very exciting year for ABLE. The first program actually opened up, and these are programs that are often run by a state treasurer's office. And the first one was Ohio actually opened up their program June 1st of 2016, so not even a year ago. And in that time now, as of today, like I said, Vermont just is the 17th state to launch it. Now, there's a lot of characteristics that are going to be identical in these different programs because there's certain aspects of the law that apply to all programs. At the same time, the law does allow for certain flexibility from one program to another so that they can start to kind of differentiate themselves in this newfound marketplace. So it's important, folks, to be able to compare one program to another, again, to figure out which one best meets their needs. So we kind of thought about this and how we can, as the ABLE National Resource Center, help people do that. So we created a comparison tool on the website. So if you go to the front page, you'll see a big map of the United States, and you'll see color-coded which states have opened ABLE accounts. And you can click on there and see, even if the state hasn't, where they are in the development of their program. But you can get on the comparison tool and you can compare up to 3 programs next to each other based off of about 12 different characteristics that we think people would want to take into consideration, such as fees, investment options, whether or not they have an associated, debit card with the account, things like that. But things that folks might want to take into consideration when choosing which ABLE account best meets their needs. So we continue to work on the website again, using feedback of folks. If folks have specific questions that they think aren't addressed in the website, we have a portal there where you can type in your question, and it goes actually directly to me, and we try and get back to folks as quickly as possible. It's another important thing to note. While I said that the ABLE Act did pass in December of 2014, the law actually doesn't mandate a state to develop these programs. It only allows them to do so. So a state has to go forward then and pass their own ABLE-related state legislation, which dictates, how the development of the program is going to be done and who's overseeing the program. When the law originally passed, actually, Alan, it stated that in order to enroll into an ABLE program and effectively set up an account, you had to do so in your state of residency. So, as an example, in my brother's case, TJ, he lives down in Texas with my folks outside of Houston. If Texas had decided not to pursue building an ABLE account, despite all this advocacy and work and appreciation towards the benefits of having an ABLE Act law, my brother, despite being eligible, would have never been able to open up an account because, let's say the state of Texas decided not to. Now, in reality, the state of Texas is working on building their program, but just as an example.
Yeah, we won't pick on Texas, but there are some. I'm clicking through the website, and there are a few states here that don't have the law on the books at all. So that's a huge miss for those residents.
Well, Congress took a look at that and said, well, we're not sure this is quite fair that, just because you happen to reside in one state and not another, that you can't take advantage of this incredibly important and beneficial tool. So in 2015, about exactly a year after they passed the original version, they went back and actually eliminated that residency requirement. So now, again, using my brother as an example, while Texas develops the program, if my brother wanted to, provided that he is in fact eligible, which he is, he could open up an account in any program being offered by any state in the country, provided that that state is offering national enrollment. And I think to date, of those 17 programs that are up and running, only 2 actually are reserving their program to in-state only. So that's pretty neat. A lot of folks still don't know that because it wasn't part of the original law. So that's an important thing. And that comparison tool offers the opportunity for families and people with disabilities to figure out specifically, based on their individual needs, which program best meets that, and then gives them information on how to move forward in setting up an account with that particular program.
So obviously, y'all have spent a lot of time and energy getting the Able Accounts laws passed and just making this a reality and sort of refining it, getting all the education built around it. So I guess what's next for you? What do you have your eye on moving forward? Is the focus for the next several years going to be the Able Accounts, or are you sort of getting that packaged well enough that you can sort of shift your focus into looking at other policies or opportunities or things like that?
So certainly there's a lot of opportunities out there related to disability policy, that affects people's financial capabilities. But in terms of ABLE, I think it's really threefold. One, it's education, education, education. There's still a lot of misinformation out there about these accounts. So we're going to continue to do all that we can to make sure that people with disabilities across the country feel comfortable taking advantage of these opportunities. It's always, as a policy person, it's always a huge fear that I think we all have that, you're going to work so hard to pass a piece of legislation, and then it's going to be passed and it's going to be great. And, for whatever reason, misinformation or complexity of the law, it's never going to be taken advantage of and folks aren't going to utilize it. So we want to make sure that ABLE doesn't fall into that bucket. 2, I think in terms of the ABLE National Resource Center, we're going to start to concentrate on, of the individuals that have actually opened up accounts, how can we support them in terms of maximizing the benefits under ABLE? And what I mean by that is, again, going back to the fact that the account owner is the person with a disability, right? And they can exercise really a newfound independence that isn't realized without an ABLE account and isn't realized necessarily with a special needs trust. So there's a good amount of financial capabilities education that we need to start providing these ABLE account owners to make sure that they're maximizing the benefits, that they're utilizing the funds in the accounts appropriately, and that, God forbid, they're never taken advantage of from a financial standpoint by anybody who might be trying to exercise authority over their accounts. So that's going to include a lot of financial literacy type things. We want to help folks better understand what the funds can be used for, how to establish short and long-term financial goals based on their specific disability-related needs, and how to stay motivated to reach those goals. I mean, these are, again, tools that I think a lot of us have been taught over the years and often take for granted, that people with disabilities, as a result of just a lack of expectation, to be honest with you, just have not been provided, and that it's imperative that they're provided these tools and skills to be able to responsibly act as ABLE account owners. So there's those two. And then moving on to the future from a policy perspective, we're going to concentrate on improving what are already great benefits under the ABLE Act. So there's a few different amendments to the current law that we'd like to see happen in order to do 2 things. One would be to broaden the eligibility of those folks that are able to open up these accounts, and then 2, to increase the benefits that are provided under the law. One of the most important things, I think, in terms of prioritizing the needs for certain amendments related to the law is under the eligibility criteria, it states that in order to open up an ABLE account, you actually had to have an onset of your disability, or in other words, you had to experience your disability prior to your 26th birthday. And I talk around the country about the different characteristics. And of course, eligibility is a big one. And folks ask me, Chris, why does an individual have to experience their disability before age 26 in order to be able to take advantage of these benefits that obviously a person who experienced their disability at 25 could appreciate just as much as a person who happened to experience their disability at 27. And what it really comes down to is when the bill was going through Congress at the very end, all bills get what's called a score. So basically it goes to an agency called the Congressional Budget Office, and they look at the bill and try and figure out how much is this going to cost to implement over a period of 10 years for the federal government. So they did that, and it came back, and it was just, it had a fiscal note on it that was just going to make it really, really tough to get through Congress, get through those final steps. So they needed to put in some type of provision to bring that cost down. So they threw in the age 26. So it's important to note that age 26 provision related to eligibility didn't exist for the first, several years of this piece of legislation being in existence. And a lot of folks that happened to experience their disability after age 26 were strong supporters and advocates of the piece of legislation. And they were very disappointed, along with many of the disability advocacy organizations, when that change was made. But I think at the end of the day, understanding that negotiation oftentimes is necessary, and understanding that in many instances, 85% of something is better than 100% of nothing, everybody kind of came around with the understanding that in the coming years, we would start to restore the original intent with respect to that eligibility criteria. So we're working with Congress to increase that age so that more people can appreciate and take advantage of the benefits under ABLE. And then I think kind of secondary are a number of other amendments, including, like you said, Alan, one of the deterrents under the ABLE account is that there is that $14,000 cap per tax year. And what happens when somebody's parent passes away and leaves, or grandparent passes away and leaves an inheritance, and they have an ABLE account, but yet the amount of money that they're left is too much in order that is allowed to be put deposited into the account? Can we, make a provision that would allow for kind of a one-time lump sum deposit? Is that an option? One of the other big kind of criticisms or comments is a lot of folks set up 529 college savings account, and then perhaps their son or daughter experiences a disability before they go to college. A big question is, well, Chris, since these look so similar, can I roll over the funds in a 529 college savings account into an ABLE account? And you would think that makes sense, obviously. But unfortunately, that's not the way that the law is written currently. So that's another example of one of those things that we might want to go in and allow for, and that would allow the benefits of what already is a really good piece of legislation or good piece of policy into perhaps a great piece of public policy.
Thank you for reaffirming my decision to never go into government anything. It's just,
yeah, it's certainly a marathon and not a sprint.
It certainly is. So it's awesome for advisors to know about special needs trusts and ABLE accounts and sort of what y'all are working on. For the advisors, though, that maybe you're saying, like, how can I get involved? Like, where could they be of assistance, whether it's doing webinars or it's providing education or going out and talking to various communities and that sort of thing? How can folks that are listening get more involved in sort of what y'all are working on and be able to make a difference if this is sort of their area of passion?
Right. Absolutely. That's a great question, Alan. What I suggest, when I was talking about those webinars that we do, one of the greatest things about them is that we pull in experts from all over the country. We here at NDI only have so much expertise to give, and we work, kind of in the disability sphere, although largely in the financial disability sphere. But we pull from financial advisors all over the country to special needs trusts, attorneys all over the country to talk about different aspects. So in terms of getting more involved, I would encourage anybody that would like to be more involved to get in contact with me. You can do it through the website, or my contact information is on our National Disability Institute website as well. If you're interested in being a guest speaker on, one of our videos or one of our webinars, we'd love to have you. Once you're looking through that map there, it's important to figure out where your state is in terms of the development of a program. You can certainly, the specific programs that are out there that are up and launched and enrolling folks are doing an incredible amount of on the ground education in those various states and abroad. So I know that they're always looking for folks in their state that would be interested in teaming up and doing in-person presentations to families and people with disabilities who are potential able account owners. So I think that's another great place to start in terms of different areas in which the folks that provide these services can get involved.
Fantastic. It's so good to know where to go, and because we may have listeners that are saying, like, is this something I've sort of wanted to get involved in? And, they may have a family member or have worked with a client that has special needs and saying, like, how do I help? So it's really great to know that there are legitimate organizations out there that have opportunities for them to be able to get out and really make a difference. So Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your expertise. I am certain you will be getting some emails and website click-throughs off this. So hopefully not too overwhelming, but thank you so much.
Absolutely, Alan. And thank you for providing the opportunity and the venue to help get the word out about these great programs that are obviously much appreciated and much needed.
If you'd like more time to spend with your clients, First Ascent Asset Management can help. First Ascent builds and manages investment portfolios for independent financial advisors and their clients for a flat fee of $500 per account. This industry-first approach to pricing makes professional investment management affordable for everyone without sacrificing quality. First Ascent's 7-member investment committee includes 5 CFAs, a PhD, and a CFP who collectively bring decades of experience, objectivity, and fresh perspectives. First Ascent offers a variety of portfolios designed to produce solid long-term performance while keeping internal expenses and trading costs low. First Ascent's high-touch service team stands with you as a resource to provide guidance and to make account opening and servicing the accounts easy and hassle-free. They also offer a streamlined technology platform to facilitate proposal generation and paperless account opening. Visit their website at firstascentam.com or give them a call at 720-465-7888. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.